Violent protests in the Netherlands at the start of the year. People venting their anger against coronavirus restrictions, demanding politicians to come up with a long-term strategy to deal with the pandemic. Easier said than done. In the Chinese city of Wuhan, total lockdown broke the chain of infection. Today, things are almost back to normal in the city where the pandemic began. While most countries in Europe opted for temporary lockdown measures with mixed results, some countries like Sweden decided to go easy on the economy, with many elderly bearing the brunt. And populist governments around the globe basically ignored the virus altogether, again pushing up their country's mortality rate. And the economies and people are suffering all the same. It's time for a silver bullet that ends the pandemic. Hello and welcome to our COVID-19 special on DW. I'm Monica Jones in Berlin, which is still in lockdown. Case numbers are going down slowly, but the virus is still very much active. So what's next? Could the no-COVID strategy be the answer to our prayers? Here's what it's about.
A new plan proposed by scientists in Germany aims to do more than just flatten the curve. It could eradicate COVID-19 and help get things back to normal. Their plan basically consists of 3 elements. First, they suggest that the government should enact a rigid and efficient lockdown. Measures could include stay-at-home orders, travel bans and the closure of schools and kindergartens, as well as all non-essential institutions, factories and shops. Government programs should be introduced to secure people's livelihoods. Apart from that, all contact should be reduced to an absolute minimum. The lockdown would stay in place until the number of new cases dropped to nearly 0. Areas that don't register any new infections would be declared green zones. In those zones, the scientists say restrictions would be lifted and life would gradually return to normality. To prevent the virus from entering a green zone, travel restrictions and quarantines would be imposed as well. The green zones would gradually expand and merge until individual countries and ultimately Europe would be back to normal. To keep infection numbers down, authorities would trace contacts, expand testing and isolate new cases. Local outbreaks of new infections would be controlled by strict measures and quarantines. The scientists say their no-COVID strategy would be the best way to restore morale and fight coronavirus fatigue. Instead of ineffective lockdown measures that keep being extended, it would offer a clear path towards normality.
Now, earlier I spoke to Professor Ilona Kkbusch, a much sought-after global health consultant who the renowned medical journal The Lancet refers to as a global health reformer. And I asked her about her take on this no-COVID strategy.
I think the key thing is that we are looking for a sustainable strategy that involves the population, that is motivating and that brings the different societal forces together. We want to work together towards no COVID. We want to create green zones that allow people to live an ordinary life. And we want to do away with this simplistic contradiction between the economy and people's lives, because they are really intertwined in so many ways. So we're very keen to say this is a positive, a motivational strategy. And if we look to Australia and see how people are living their lives now, even organizing the Australian Open with thousands of spectators, then it is this motivational goal that we want to work towards.
Right. Right. Now, before we look to Australia, let's first dissect a little bit this sustainable approach. I believe that this no-COVID strategy aims for an infection rate of below 10%. Where are these 10% suddenly coming from? Why? Why 10%?
Well, it's the various calculations from the modelers that help us understand that, because then, of course, the infection rates are pushed down, the reproduction rates are low, and we actually get an exponential reduction of infections. And that also means that people can be traced. If there is an infection, then there are enough resources to actually try and find out who else, where the infection has come from, who else this person has been in contact with. So it becomes a really manageable system. It becomes transparent, and one can work with each individual that is infected. The larger your numbers are, the more difficult it is to have a tracing strategy. And that, of course, then in turn increases the incidence.
Now, once a region is below those 10%, the strategy says it is a green zone. But how do you keep that green zone contained? Do you close borders again to keep people from red zones out of there?
Well, that is the strategy. The strategy is even to have a sort of competition that people want to get their everyday life back. And if you're in a green zone, that means if you act responsibly, that you can actually move around again. You can't let go of all restrictions. We do recommend that for a significant period. For example, even in green zones, people still wear masks. But yes, it is a strategy, as we've learned from other parts of the world, that the contained area, the green zone, is, the interaction, the mobility has to be reduced. But of course, we have to be realistic. So one of the things of a whole of society strategy is that a green zone might have a factory or a company that has many people who work for them in the red zone. So we need to work on clear testing strategies, a cooperation with those companies. A lot of these things can be managed, but there needs to be not only the political will to manage it, but also the will of all the other societal actors.
Exactly. I think this is a very important point you're mentioning there, that everybody, the people especially included, have to support those strategies. You've mentioned Australia as a good example. Now, if we have good examples and what you say sounds so easy to do, why aren't authorities just adopting it and doing it?
Well, to some extent, there is a climate that seems to hinder learning. We always have a tendency to discuss what can't be done. We have a tendency to say we are different. You know, one says, oh, we can't learn from Taiwan because they're an island. I mean, Taiwan is 24 million people who live very close to each other. So, you can compare it to the UK that has enormous high infection rates and is also an island, at least England is. So I think we have to be much more willing to learn. We have to be willing to innovate, to bring the societal forces together and to say, we want to do this. And I think this whole approach, we are in this together. I must say, I've lived in Australia for a while. This is what has most impressed me, that people have said, this is for all of us. This is not just for me, but if I do my bit, we all are going to benefit. And I myself am going to benefit because I can go to the espresso shop next door.
Professor Ilona Kkbusch there, a much sought after, as mentioned, global health consultant from Switzerland there. Thank you so much for your time, and let's hope that this new strategy will overcome people's fatigue with the lockdown.
Thank you very much for having me. Bye-bye.
So let's remember, we're all in this together. And let's not forget, there's also a vaccine available now. Which brings us to our science correspondent, Derek Williams, who will answer one of your questions now.
How long will it take for countries to vaccinate significant parts of their population?
A couple of factors will play roles here. The big hurdle at the moment is to produce enough doses to vaccinate 2/3 of the world's population. So over 5.5 billion people. Manufacturers of the vaccines approved so far say they can provide a significant fraction of what's needed to do that by the end of 2021, but not all of it. Making vaccines is a complex process, and as we've seen in the last few weeks, lots can go wrong in production. But hey, it's still only early February, right? And don't forget, several other vaccines are also approaching the regulatory finish line. I'm confident that in some places, at least, widespread vaccination will be the rule by, say, July or August. Heck, the way Israel's going, it'll be a lot sooner than that. But reaching goals in other countries will be challenging, as was all too predictable. And despite the COVAX initiative, it's already clear that wealthier countries that bankrolled vaccine development efforts and placed early orders will be first in line when it comes to distribution. My guess is it'll be pretty much impossible for many poorer nations to make significant progress in vaccinating their populations for at least 6 months, simply because most available supplies will be snapped up quickly. Logistics will also pose a challenge, as some of the approved vaccines require high-tech cold chains. So I'd say the answer to the question of how long it'll take for countries to vaccinate widely depends very much on the country. Some will do it in months, I think, and others, it looks like it'll take at least a year, and possibly more than one.